The rain hits the glass, but the storm is inside you. Your phone lights up. Your heart doesn't just beat, it races. The silence between messages feels like falling. You tell yourself this is love. You tell yourself this is connection. You tell yourself that the tremble in your hands when they don't respond is just proof of how much you care. But here's the truth you don't want to hear. That's not love. That's fear wearing a disguise. You're not in a relationship. You're in a hostage negotiation with your own need for validation and the person you think you're devoted to. They're not your partner. They're the fix for a void you won't face. Tonight, we're cracking open the file on the oldest con in the book, the difference between attachment and love. And I promise you, once you see it, there's no going back. Before Jung mapped the architecture of the unconscious, before Kierkegaard wrote about the terror of becoming yourself, the world was already full of people mistaking possession for devotion. Carl Jung, the man who spent his life studying the masks we wear, knew something most people die without learning. The person you think you love might just be a projection of the person you refuse to become. And Kierkegaard? He understood that most people never choose themselves. They choose comfort. They choose the familiar prison over the terrifying freedom of standing alone. This isn't a conversation about romance. This is a conversation about the con you're running on yourself. Because attachment doesn't just feel like love. It mimics it perfectly. It speaks the same language. It wears the same face. But underneath, it's something far more dangerous. It's fear, dressed up as devotion. Attachment is not connection. It is dependency. It's the feeling that without this person, you are incomplete. That without their approval, their presence, their validation, you are somehow less. Attachment is the belief that your peace is held hostage by someone else's behavior. Jung called this psychic possession. You don't love the person, you love what they represent. Safety, certainty, the illusion that you won't have to face the terrifying silence of your own company. Here's the test. Does their absence create anxiety, or does it create space? If the thought of losing them feels like falling into a void, that's not love. That's addiction. You're drawn to someone the way an addict is drawn to a drug. Not because they make you whole, but because they numb the emptiness inside. Attachment is a whisper in your ear at 3 a.m. I need you to complete me. It's the voice that tells you, without you, I am nothing. It's the panic that says, stay or I will break. It masquerades as romantic devotion, but it's actually emotional blackmail, a transaction dressed up as intimacy. Love, real love, is something else entirely. It doesn't need, it chooses. It doesn't cling, it releases. It doesn't demand constant proof of its existence. Real love is self-sufficient, rooted in its own completeness. Kierkegaard understood this. He wrote about the knight of faith, the individual who loves without grasping, who commits without losing himself. The knight of faith stands alone and whole, and from that wholeness he extends outward. He doesn't need the other person to validate his existence. He chooses them because they enhance a life that's already full. Do you see the difference? Attachment is a chain. Love is an expansion. Attachment makes you smaller, more fragile, more dependent. Love makes you larger, more resilient, more sovereign. Attachment is a contraction around fear. Love is an expansion from strength. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most people have never experienced real love. What they call love is actually a complex negotiation of needs, a mutual agreement to use each other as emotional life support. And the most brutal truth of all, the person you're attached to can feel it. They sense the desperation. They sense the need. And whether they admit it or not, it repels them, because no one respects a person who has made them the center of their psychological survival. Let's look at the evidence. Let's examine the case files of those who understood the difference. Jung's relationship with his own psyche was a lesson in detachment. When he descended into what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period where most men would have sought external rescue, he didn't run to another person for salvation. He went deeper into himself. He understood that the figures in his dreams, the anima, the shadow, the archetypes, were parts of himself he'd been projecting onto others, the woman he thought he needed. She was actually a symbol of his own undeveloped feminine qualities, the authority figures he resented, projections of his own unlived potential. Jung's great realization: the person you're attached to is often just a screen for the film of your own psyche. When you confuse that projection for love, you trap both yourself and the other person in a performance neither of you wrote. Kierkegaard broke off his engagement to Regina Olsen, a woman he genuinely loved, because he understood something most people never grasp. True love sometimes requires you to let go. He knew that his calling, his path toward becoming himself, would require a solitude she couldn't understand. And rather than chain her to his journey or compromise his own becoming, he made the most painful choice. He released her. This wasn't cruelty. This was love. Because real love doesn't demand the other person sacrifice their truth to maintain the illusion of togetherness. Real love says, "I will not make you smaller so I can feel safe." Kierkegaard spent the rest of his life writing about what it means to become a single individual, a person who stands alone before existence, responsible for his own meaning. That's the foundation of love. You must become a self before you can truly give yourself to another. Now comes the hard part. Now comes the mirror. You need to ask yourself a question, and you need to answer it honestly. Are you in love, or are you just afraid to be alone? Because here's the grim tally. Every time you checked your phone hoping for their message, that was fear. Every time you changed who you are to make them stay, that was self-betrayal. Every time you felt that sinking panic at the thought of losing them, that was attachment, not love. You call it devotion. Jung called it possession. You call it caring. Kierkegaard called it despair, the sickness unto death, the refusal to become yourself. Let me tell you what attachment really is. It's the deal you made with your own incompleteness. You looked at the work of individuation, the terrifying, lonely process of becoming whole, and you said, "No, thank you. I'll just find someone to fill the void instead." But the void is still there. You just can't feel it as acutely when someone else is standing in front of it. Here's what attachment does. It turns you into an actor in someone else's play. You perform, you adjust, you monitor every word, every gesture, calculating what will keep them close and what might push them away. You stopped being a man and started being a character, a role defined by their needs, their moods, their approval. And the worst part, you can feel it happening. You can feel yourself getting smaller, more anxious, more desperate. But you tell yourself it's worth it. You tell yourself this is what love costs, but it's not love. It's a hostage situation, and you're both the hostage and the negotiator. Jung warned about this. He said that when you don't integrate your shadow, when you don't face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, you project them onto others. The person you're attached to becomes a screen for all your unlived potential, all your denied fears, all your abandoned dreams, and you don't love them. You love the idea that if you can just keep them, you won't have to become yourself. So here it is, the question that will tell you everything. If they left tomorrow, would you be relieved or destroyed? If the answer is destroyed, if the thought of their absence feels like annihilation, then you're not in love, you're dependent. You've made another person responsible for your internal peace, and that's not romantic. That's a cage you both live in. Kierkegaard wrote about the sickness unto death, the condition of a self that refuses to become itself. Most people, he said, never even realize they're sick. They spend their entire lives in a state of unconscious despair, never quite whole, never quite real, always defining themselves in relation to others. Attachment is that sickness. It's the refusal to stand alone. It's the belief that you need someone else's presence to justify your existence, and every day you live in that state, you're dying. Not dramatically, not visibly, but quietly, in the way that matters most. You're dying to yourself. Let's look at what happens when you choose attachment over love. Let's see the wreckage. When you're attached, you lose respect, both for yourself and from the other person. Because respect is built on boundaries, on the sense that you are a sovereign entity who doesn't need constant validation to exist. When you chase, when you cling, when you make yourself smaller to keep them close, they feel it. And whether they're conscious of it or not, they lose respect for you. Because respect is built on boundaries, on the sense that you are a sovereign entity who doesn't need constant validation to exist. But when you're attached, those boundaries collapse. You become predictable, controllable, manageable, and in the cold calculus of human attraction, need is repellent. People are drawn to those who are complete, who are rooted, who are untouchable in their self-sufficiency. Attachment destroys that. It makes you vulnerable in the wrong way, not the vulnerability of honesty, but the vulnerability of desperation. Here's the deeper cost. Every moment you spend performing for someone else's approval, you're committing spiritual suicide. Jung called this the rejection of the self, the true, whole individual you could become. Every time you silence your truth to avoid conflict, every time you pretend to be someone you're not to keep the peace, every time you say yes when you mean no, you're betraying yourself, and that betrayal has consequences. Resentment builds first. You start to hate them for not loving the real you, but the real you never showed up. Then comes anxiety. You're constantly monitoring the relationship, trying to control their perception of you. And finally, emptiness. Even when you're together, you feel alone. Because the person they love isn't you, it's the character you're playing. Kierkegaard was relentless about this. He said that most people live in inauthentic despair, never fully alive, never fully themselves. They're ghosts, playing roles, performing scripts written by fear and social conditioning. And attachment is the mechanism of that inauthenticity. It's how you trade your soul for the illusion of connection. So what's the way out? What does real love, the kind that doesn't chain, that doesn't diminish, actually look like? It starts with a single, terrifying commitment. You must become whole. Jung spent his entire career mapping this process. He called it individuation, the journey of becoming a complete, integrated self. Individuation is not comfortable, it's not quick. It's the work of descending into your own depths and confronting everything you've been avoiding. The parts of yourself you've denied, the shadow, the projections you've placed on others, the anima, the animus, the masks you wear to belong, the persona. It's the process of saying, I will face myself, all of myself, even the parts that terrify me. And here's what happens when you do that work. You stop needing other people to complete you. You stop projecting your unlived potential onto them. You stop making them responsible for your happiness. You become rooted, grounded, fully alive in your own existence. And from that place, from that completeness, you can finally love without needing to possess. You can choose someone without needing them. You can commit without losing yourself. Kierkegaard described this state as the night of faith, the individual who has passed through despair and chosen himself fully. The knight of faith doesn't avoid relationships. He doesn't become cold or isolated, but he loves from a position of sovereignty, not need. He says, I am whole, I am complete, and from that wholeness I extend toward you, not because I need you, but because I choose you. That's love, real, dangerous, liberating love. It's dangerous because it requires you to let go of control. You can't manipulate someone into staying if you're not clinging. You can't use guilt or need as leverage if you're already whole. It's liberating because you're finally free. Free from the prison of attachment, free from the performance, free from the constant, exhausting need for reassurance. Here's the part no one tells you. Individuation is lonely, terrifyingly lonely. Because when you stop performing, when you stop seeking validation, when you stop making others responsible for your peace, most people will disappear. They'll sense that you're no longer controllable, no longer manageable, and they'll move on to someone who is. And that's okay. That's necessary. Because the people who stay, the ones who love you for who you actually are, not for the role you play, those are the relationships worth having. Jung said, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. When you become yourself, you'll finally be able to communicate those things, and the people who can't handle that depth, they were never meant for your journey. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop making other people the source of your internal stability. It means you don't check your phone compulsively, waiting for validation. You don't change who you are to keep someone comfortable. You don't sacrifice your truth to avoid conflict. It means you become anchored in yourself, not in their approval. And paradoxically, when you do this, when you become truly self-sufficient, you become magnetic. Because people are drawn to those who don't need them, who choose them from a place of fullness rather than lack. Detachment is not coldness. It's the highest form of love. Because it says, I love you enough to not make you responsible for my happiness. I love you enough to remain whole, even if you leave. I love you enough to never lose myself in you. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. The untouchable man doesn't beg. He doesn't chase. He doesn't perform. He stands rooted in himself, fully aware of his own worth, and he extends toward others from that foundation, not from need. When conflict arises, he doesn't scramble to smooth it over. He holds his ground because his peace isn't dependent on the other person's mood. When someone withdraws, he doesn't panic. He gives them space because he knows that real connection can't be forced. When someone tries to manipulate him through guilt, through silence, through emotional blackmail, he doesn't engage. He sees through the game and he refuses to play. This makes him dangerous, not in a violent way, but in the way that truly sovereign people are always dangerous to those who rely on manipulation and control. He's unplayable, unconditioned, untouchable, and ironically, that's when real love becomes possible, because he's no longer grasping, he's no longer performing, he's simply present, fully himself, offering connection without the chains of attachment. Jung understood this, Kierkegaard understood this, and now you have no excuse not to understand it too. Here's the truth that changes everything. Once you see the difference between attachment and love, you can't unsee it. The patterns become obvious, the desperation, the performance, the self-betrayal. You'll try to ignore them. You'll want to go back to the comfortable illusion because the familiar cage is less terrifying than the unknown freedom. But you can't unsee what you've seen. Once you recognize the cage, every moment inside it becomes unbearable. That's what it means to suffer from awareness. You can't go back to the comfort of ignorance. And once you see the truth, there's no going back. You'll have to choose. Do you keep performing, keep attaching, keep betraying yourself for the illusion of connection? Or do you do the hard, lonely, necessary work of becoming whole? This isn't a motivational talk. This isn't a pep rally. This channel doesn't exist to make you feel better. It exists to break you open so something real can finally emerge. The work of individuation, the journey from attachment to love, is the hardest thing you'll ever do. It will cost you relationships. It will cost you the comforting illusions you've built your life around. It will force you to face the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding. But it's the only way to freedom. It's the only way to love without losing yourself. So here's your call to action. Write this in the comments. I choose sovereignty over attachment. Not because it's easy, not because it feels good, but because it's the only choice that doesn't end in spiritual death. The rain is still hitting the glass, but the storm inside you, that's yours to quiet. You don't come here to hang out. You don't come here to feel comfortable. You come here to wake up. And now that you're awake, there's no going back. Welcome to Nocturnus. Case closed.